Hello, my name is Justin Wood, and I'm an associate professor in informatics at Indiana University Bloomington. I work at the intersection of biological and artificial intelligence to understand the origins of intelligence in animals and machines. Our research focuses on two interrelated questions. First, what are the origins of knowledge? When a newborn first opens her eyes, what kinds of mechanisms does she use to learn how to perceive and understand the world? What mechanisms power the impressive feats of learning and behavior we see across the animal kingdom? The second question is, how do we build machines with animal-like intelligence? If we have a complete answer to the first question, then we should be able to reverse engineer the brain's learning mechanisms and build machines that learn like newborn animals. Ultimately, we want to understand the learning mechanisms in brains with sufficient precision to be able to build a single system that develops all core mental skills seen in humans and animals. The challenge is that there is no agreement on the type of algorithms or ingredients we need to grow intelligence. You can think about theories of the origins of intelligence as occupying a one-dimensional space determined by the number and domain specificity of innate mental skills. So we have radical nativism on the right with lots of innate or predetermined mental structures, and we have radical empiricism on the left with few, if any, innate structures. This has been a very long debate. So here we have positions in the history of Western philosophy, moving from Plato to Descartes to Kant to Hume to Locke, going from nativism to empiricism. And here we have positions in contemporary cognitive science, again, going from radical nativism to radical empiricism. Despite being a 2,000-year-old debate, there is still no agreement on fundamental issues. Researchers disagree on when mental skills develop, how mental skills develop, why mental skills develop, and even on what mental skills are. Are mental skills attractors in a dynamic system, or are they enduring genetically encoded capacities? The first step in addressing this debate is we need an animal model. The nativist empiricist debate requires controlling the experiences available for learning. But this is difficult. Most animals need a caregiver to stay alive. But once you introduce a caregiver, you've now introduced a huge amount of uncontrolled experience into the environment. So we need an animal that can be raised in strictly controlled environments from birth, without a caregiver. To do this, our lab focuses on newborn chicks. Chicks have many capacities or characteristics that make them an optimal model system for studying the origins of intelligence. First, we can perform rigorous controlled rearing experiments on newborn chicks, giving us strict control over all of their experiences. We even use night vision goggles to make sure that chicks don't receive any uncontrolled visual experiences during animal husbandry tasks. Second, birds and mammals share homologous cortical circuits with a nearly identical pattern of input and output neurons. With both birds and mammals, you see a hierarchy of sensory information processing. Moreover, birds and mammals share a similar large-scale hub architecture, including hubs for visual areas, auditory areas, limbic areas, hippocampal areas, and associative areas. Given the similarities in brain structure, studies of chicks can reveal general insights into the development of vertebrate intelligence. Third, chicks develop many of the same core capacities as humans. There's evidence that chicks have object recognition, selective attention, numerical cognition, intuitive physics, and so forth. So studies of chicks can reveal how core capacities develop in brains. The second step in addressing the nativist empiricist debate is we need high-powered methods. We need the most precise data we can get for modeling the development of intelligence. Over the last 15 years, our lab has developed several new automated controlled rearing methods, including virtual reality chambers, motor learning chambers, and group collective behavior chambers. These chambers are fully automated and run 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, continuously recording all of the chick's behavior through micro cameras embedded in the ceilings of the chambers. Since the methods are automated, they are high-powered and completely eliminate experimenter error and bias. And by building our experiments in a video game engine, we can raise animals in interactive virtual worlds and control all of their experiences. And since this is virtual reality, we can raise animals in unnatural worlds and attempt to push cognition beyond its natural bounds. As you'll see shortly, this is essential for exploring how experience shapes the mind. So let's start by asking whether core visual capacities are present at birth during an animal's first encounters with objects. This is a widely used definition of an innate capacity. So here's one study from our lab exploring the origins of viewpoint invariant object recognition. During the learning phase, the first week of life, we raised chicks in a visual world containing a single object rotating through a 60-degree viewpoint range. This was the entirety of their visual experience with objects. We then tested whether the chicks could recognize their imprinted object across novel viewpoints. On the right, we have the imprinted object shown from a novel viewpoint, and on the left, we have a novel object which was actually more similar to the imprinting stimulus from a pixel level perspective than the new viewpoint of the imprinted object was to the imprinting stimulus. So this task required building high-level object representations that generalize across low-level image features. If the chicks can recognize their imprinted object, then they should spend more time with the imprinted object than the novel object. And we found that chicks can readily solve this type of problem. When imprinted to any one of these viewpoints, chicks can then immediately recognize the object across novel viewpoints. In fact, we found that chicks can rapidly develop many core visual skills. Chicks rapidly develop visual binding, the ability to bind colors and shapes into integrated object representations. This allows chicks to distinguish between objects with the same colors and shapes, but in a swapped configuration. We also found that chicks can solve object parsing tasks. When imprinted to a single object moving on a single background, chicks can immediately recognize the object across novel backgrounds. Chicks have exquisite motion perception. If we imprint chicks to a point-light display of a walking hen, they will distinguish that from a point-light display of a walking cat. Chicks can even solve object permanence tasks. If we raise chicks in a world where objects never move behind other objects, and then the object disappears behind a barrier for the first time, chicks will spend about 1 to 2 minutes by the screen where the object just disappeared. Finally, chicks have viewpoint invariant face recognition. If we imprint chicks to a single viewpoint of a face, they can then recognize that face across novel views. So, chicks can do a lot from a little. They develop high-level visual capacities in impoverished environments that contain a single object. These findings suggest that brains have hard-coded domain-specific knowledge. Core object perception develops rapidly in the absence of extensive experience with objects. So, again, it might be tempting to conclude that these mental skills are innate, hardwired into the brain through evolution. But another possibility is that these core visual skills are learned. The experiences available in these controlled rearing chambers, however sparse and impoverished they may be, might still be sufficient for learning these skills. Specifically, core skills might be learned from visual experience with the natural world. Two defining features of natural worlds is that they're slow and they're smooth. In this two-dimensional experience space, with speed and smoothness as axes, natural visual environments fall in the bottom left corner of this space. Natural worlds change slowly over time, and they change smoothly over time. To test whether the development of object recognition requires natural visual experience, we raise newborn chicks in both natural and unnatural worlds. Some chicks were raised with objects that moved slowly and smoothly over time, like this object in the bottom left corner. Other chicks were raised with objects that moved quickly over time, like the object on the right. Other chicks were raised with objects that moved non-smoothly over time, teleporting from viewpoint to viewpoint. We found that core visual skills only develop when chicks are raised with objects that move slowly and smoothly over time. Object parsing, object recognition, visual binding, object permanence, and face recognition all require experience with slow and smooth motion. These findings show that core visual skills are not predetermined. They emerge when brains learn in natural visual worlds. So, given that at least some learning appears to be involved in the development of visual intelligence, our lab has started exploring models on the other end of the nativist-empiricist divide. We're currently exploring the extent to which baseline empiricist models can explain the rapid development of visual capacities. These are domain general models with no innate knowledge. The models start from scratch and gradually learn about the world from raw sensory input. And to encourage the models to learn like brains, we use an unsupervised temporal learning objective that mimics the timescale of spike timing dependent plasticity in brains. We then measure whether domain general models develop the same domain-specific capacities as animals when trained on the same experiences as animals. To do so, we clamp down on experience and give the same experiences to both animals and computational models. This involves running parallel controlled rearing experiments on the animals and on the models. We raise newborn animals in strictly controlled virtual worlds so we know all of their experiences. We then measure what the animals learned in those worlds. We then raise embodied deep neural networks in the same virtual worlds as the newborn animals, then measure whether the models learned like the animals. And by raising animals and machines in the same environments and testing them with the same tasks, we can directly compare their learning abilities. So in this talk, I'm going to focus on the viewpoint invariant object recognition task that I showed you earlier. And just to remind you, the chicks are raised with a single object shown from a single 60-degree viewpoint range. And then we tested whether the chicks could recognize that object across novel viewpoints. Here's the data from one of the conditions. On the left, you can see the viewpoint range of the object during the input phase. And on the right, you can see how well that limited training data generalized across novel viewpoints. Chance performance was 50%, so any boxes that are green means that the chick recognized the object from that viewpoint. As you can see, performance was quite impressive. Despite receiving training data of just a single object, seen from a single viewpoint range, the chick successfully recognized their imprinted object across novel viewpoints. So chicks are capable of one-shot view invariant object recognition. So now that we have the chick data, we can run the corresponding digital twin study. We first built a digital twin of the controlled rearing chamber in a video game engine. Here's a video showing one of our digital twin chambers. And we try to make these digital twins as photorealistic as possible, which allows animals and machines to be trained on the same data and tested on the same tasks. We then insert deep neural networks into virtual chick avatars and raise those virtual agents in the digital twins. We use domain general transformer models that start with no innate knowledge and learn through unsupervised temporal learning. The models push together the embeddings from images that occur close together in time and push away embeddings from images that occur in different points in time. This temporal selection process mimics the unsupervised temporal learning that occurs in brains. And then after training, we test what the models learned, and in particular, whether they learned like the animals. Here's one simulation showing how we collect the training data for the models. The video on the right gives a top-down view of the agent, and the video on the left shows the first-person images collected by the agent. During the simulation, the agent moves to different positions in the chamber, and then once they reach a location, they then move their head around the 3 axes of rotation. This densely samples the environment, giving the transformers access to the same retinal images as the chicks. We simulate the chicks' visual experiences at 10 frames per second, and then use those images to train our models. We tested 4 different sizes of vision transformers, including those with 1, 3, 6, or 9 attention heads and layers. The red line will show the chick's average performance recognizing objects across novel viewpoints. When we tested the transformer's ability to recognize objects across those same novel viewpoints, they performed almost identical to the chicks. This was the case across all 4 of the rearing conditions in which we tested the chicks. So transformers can learn viewpoint invariant object recognition in the same impoverished environment as newborn chicks, including from experience of a single object seen from a single viewpoint range. This is important because a dominant assumption in our field is that transformers are more data hungry than brains. But this assumption is based on studies where the models and brains receive completely different training data from one another. When we carefully match the training data across brains and models, they perform at similar levels. You may have noticed that neither the chicks nor the models were perfect at this task. This is helpful because we can leverage their patterns of successes and failures and see if they match. And this provides a more fine-grained view of the object representations built by the chicks and the models. So we first computed the average performance of the chicks across each of the 12 test viewpoints, and then computed how correlated each of the chicks was to the average chick performance. The y-axis shows the correlation with chick performance, and each of the red dots is the correlation of an individual chick. Some chicks were highly correlated with average chick performance, whereas others were less correlated. And here's the performance of the models, including both convolutional neural networks, CNNs, and transformers. All of the models, except for the smallest transformer, develop the same kinds of object representations as newborn chicks. So models don't just succeed on the same tasks as chicks, they build the same kinds of representations as chicks. They make the same patterns of errors, and they have the same patterns of successes. So to summarize, I've shown you evidence that object recognition is present in newborn animals. But critically, I've also shown you evidence that object recognition is learnable by a domain general neural network in a matched newborn-like environment. So while object recognition appears to be innate, it can actually be readily explained through a blank slate learning mechanism. And this turns out to be true for many other core capacities. All of the capacities on the left are found in newborn animals. And by performing digital twin studies, our lab has found that all of these capacities are learnable by a domain general neural network in a matched environment. So returning to the nativist empiricist debate, These studies support a radical empiricist view of the origins of knowledge. Domain-general neural networks learn domain-specific capacities when they're trained on the same data as biological systems. So is domain generality all we need? I don't think so. I think we need two components to create intelligence: a flexible domain-general neural network that can absorb the statistical structure of the world, and a rigid domain-optimized body that creates the experiences that shape the brain. Both of these structures are necessary. We need flexibility and we need constraints, but we need them in different tissues. To show you why the body matters so much for developing intelligence, I'm going to present 3 quick examples. The first example concerns the connectivity of newborn brains. It's quite common in our field to look at newborn animals, then conclude that any complex structure that you see must be innate and genetically encoded. But this view ignores prenatal development. What happens if we take prenatal development seriously? In this study, we asked whether a domain-general neural network could reproduce 3 signatures of the newborn visual system: edge sensitivity in early layers, shape sensitivity in later layers, and an increase in receptive fields across layers. To test this, we took our domain-general model, then trained it on prenatal retinal waves. Retinal waves are spontaneously produced by developing retinas, so they provide the major source of data from which prenatal visual systems learn. We used an accurate retinal wave generator and then produced videos of retinal waves, which look like this. Notice that there are no stable or bounded shapes. These are just waves of activity flowing across the retina. Remarkably, when trained on retinal waves, transformers develop into newborn-like visual systems. The model starts with none of these 3 signatures, and then develops all of the signatures of newborn visual systems. The model develops edge representations in early layers, shape representations in later layers, and increasing receptive fields across layers. These are all emergent products of a domain-general neural network adapting to prenatal experience. None of these signatures need to be genetically encoded into the system. I like this study because it shows that the large-scale architecture of newborn visual systems is a statistical product of a domain-general neural network adapting to prenatal experience. So if we ask what role genes have in building intelligence, we might say that genes specify the retina and a domain-general cortex, and then experience does the work of selecting the structure. In other words, birth is not the starting point of knowledge, it's a point on a developmental pathway. A domain-general substrate can develop domain-specific knowledge by adapting to prenatal experience. My second example highlights the richness of everyday embodied experience for learning. When an agent can move to diverse locations and make diverse head movements, they acquire a stream of spatially and temporally rich data. To test the quality of this data on learning, we recorded the stream of images and used those images to train a domain-general neural network. Remarkably, despite having no hard-coded knowledge about shape, the model spontaneously transformed from a color-based visual system into a shape-based visual system. You can check out the details in our paper, but in brief, these RDMs show that the embedding space of the models groups objects by color in the untrained models, but then groups objects by shape in the trained models. The visual experience is produced by moving around a white room with a single object are sufficient to transform the representational space of a model from color-based to shape-based. We can then perform controlled rearing experiments on the AI models, asking which particular experiences drive the development of shape perception. In one condition, the agents could no longer perform head movements. They had to stare at the object the entire time. And we found in this case that the development of shape perception was highly impaired. In another condition, we teleported the agent from place to place, so they didn't get any of the transitional views obtained from moving from location to location. Again, we found that the development of shape perception was highly impaired. In another condition, the agent could only move in the depth plane. And again, we found that the development of shape perception was impaired. And in a final condition, the agent could only move in the lateral plane. And again, we found the development of shape perception was impaired. So the study shows why newborn animals learn so rapidly in impoverished environments. Diverse temporally linked views drive the development of shape perception, and embodied agents get this kind of data for free as they explore the world. My final example concerns the specificity of the body. In addition to learning from diverse temporally linked views, the training data needs to be formatted in the right way. The retina, for example, formats incoming sensory signals before they reach the brain. Here's an example showing how the retina substantially changes the experiences that reach the brain. To test how much this body-generated experience matters for visual intelligence, we created a family of artificial retinas and varied the properties like fovea size. Some retinas were similar to human retinas, whereas others were not. We then filtered egocentric visual experiences from newborn chicks and human infants through these artificial retinas, and we found that only human-like retinas produce shape perception. As model retinal processing diverged from human retinal processing, like if the fovea was too large, we found that shape perception failed to develop. So returning to our nativist empiricist debate, explaining visual intelligence requires two types of tissues, each anchored on each side of the debate. Creating intelligence requires coupling a flexible domain general neural network with a rigid domain-optimized body. When a flexible neural network learns from experiences filtered through the body, the system can rapidly develop the complex structures and capacities of the human and animal mind. So to conclude, this framework may provide a strategy for building a unified theory of intelligence. In this talk, I focused on how visual structures like edges and shape and objects are emergent products of a domain general neural network adapting to body-generated experiences. But this framework can also explain how other modalities and domains develop. Across audition, motor tasks, navigation, and social behavior, we can understand core capacities as being statistical products of a flexible domain general neural network adapting to body-generated experiences. Critically, the same model can be used to explain all of these capacities without needing to hard-code domain-specific assumptions into the model. Initially, the cortex is domain general. Then, after being trained on body-generated experiences, that substrate develops domain-specific structure. Thank you for your time. This research is the product of hard work by many fantastic scientists, and I also want to thank our funding sources. If you're interested in learning more about our research, please feel free to send me an email. You can also check out our website at buildingamind.com. Thank you very much.